Your 30s are not a rehearsal. This is the decade when life stops asking what you might want someday and starts sending invoices for what you already chose. The rent or mortgage gets real, the children get real, the aging parents get real, the career ceiling gets real, the body gets real, the difference between looking stable and actually being stable gets very real. Most people enter this decade with a decent salary and a completely unfinished control system. That is the dangerous part. They think the problem is that life got more expensive. That is only the visible part. The deeper problem is that by the time you reach your 30s, money is no longer moving through one or two simple decisions. It is moving through a live control room. Debt pulls one lever. Credit pricing pulls another. Housing pulls another. Retirement pulls another. Taxes, health, children, emergencies, career risk, family obligations, and lifestyle expectations all start fighting over the same current. If your financial control system is weak, every new responsibility feels like an attack. If your control system is strong, the same decade that crushes other people becomes the decade that gives you strategic power. I want you to understand something clearly. Your 30s are not mainly about making more money. They are about deciding what is allowed to control your money. That is the real contest. A lot of people think wealth is built by getting one big break. I have spent my life watching a different truth. Wealth is usually built when a person stops living as a collection of reactions and starts living by a design system. Your 30s are where that design either gets installed or postponed. And postponement is expensive. The first thing I would tear out of your system is consumer debt. I do not care how normal it has become. I care what it does. Consumer debt is not just a balance. It is a command. It tells your future cash where to go before you have even earned it. It taxes your raises before you feel them. It converts your earning power into someone else's certainty. People soften this because the debt is common. They say everybody has car payments, everybody has student loans, everybody floats a balance. Once in a while, everybody finances furniture. Everybody carries something. That is exactly why it is so dangerous. When a trap becomes normal, people stop seeing the bars. I want you to look at debt the way I look at a bad business contract. If you owe $400 a month on one thing and $600 on another, you are not just paying $1,000. You are surrendering decision rights. That money could have built savings, bought ownership, funded mobility, reduced stress, or allowed you to say no to bad work. Instead, it is locked into obligations that do not care whether your boss changes, your roof leaks, your child gets sick, or your father needs help. That is why I call consumer debt a control hijacker. It is not just expensive. It steals flexibility at exactly the age when flexibility has the highest value. In your 20s, you can survive a sloppy system because your life is still narrow. In your 30s, life widens, responsibilities stack. The number of things that can go wrong multiplies. You cannot afford to juggle a household, a demanding job, perhaps children, perhaps parents, and also a pile of monthly obligations that were created by your younger self trying to feel comfortable. I am not interested in whether paying it off feels exciting. I am interested in whether it restores control. A lot of people want to skip that step and go straight to investing. They want the language of wealth without doing the surgery that wealth requires. That is backwards. You do not build a good control system on top of a leak you are too polite to fix. Once consumer debt is gone, the next control lever is your credit. I am not romantic about credit scores. They are not morality tests. They are pricing mechanisms. They are the silent way the system decides how expensive your future will be. That is why I tell you to stop thinking of a credit score as a vanity number and start thinking of it as your future price tag. A tiny difference in rate on a mortgage can cost you tens of thousands of dollars over time for the exact same house, the exact same walls, the exact same neighborhood, the exact same kitchen you will eventually complain about. One late payment can stay on your record for years and quietly reprice your life. That is not dramatic language. That is math wearing a polite suit. When people say credit does not matter because they do not plan to borrow, I hear fantasy. Most people in their 30s will touch housing decisions, insurance decisions, loan decisions, business decisions, or refinancing decisions. Even if you dislike debt, the system still uses your credit behavior as a signal. And signals get priced. So protect the signal, pay every bill on time, every time. Not because that sounds responsible, but because being late is a stupid way to volunteer for a worse future. Keep utilization low. Do not let your need for novelty open accounts you do not need. Do not close old accounts carelessly just because you are in the mood to simplify. Your history is part of the machine. Respect it. This is what adults rarely get told in plain English. A strong score is not there to make you proud. It is there to reduce friction when life asks for leverage. In this decade, I do not want good. I want excellent. I want the kind of score that starts with an 8 whenever possible. Because 0.5% on a mortgage is not a detail when it compounds for 30 years. Now I want to move to the center of the whole decade. Your 30s are when improvisation stops working. If you are still managing money one surprise at a time, 1 month at a time, one emotional decision at a time, you are not managing money. you are doing financial whack-a-mole. Every time one problem gets hit down, another pops up: retirement taxes, house maintenance, insurance, child care, college, parents' travel, career shifts, disability risk, estate documents. You cannot out-hustle a system that has no map. That is why this decade demands a long-range control plan. Not a vague hope, not a folder full of bookmarked videos, not a loose promise to be better with money. A real plan. I want you to know how much you need to save. I want you to know what your retirement target actually requires. I want you to know what happens if one income disappears. I want you to know who can make decisions if you cannot. I want you to know where your insurance is weak. I want you to know which tax advantages you are using and which ones you are foolishly leaving on the table. I want you to know what progress looks like before volatility tricks you into thinking you are failing. A design system turns anxiety into sequence. That matters because your 30s create a cruel kind of pressure. Everything feels urgent at once. And when everything feels urgent, people start solving the nearest fire instead of the most important fire. They overfund what screams and underfund what compounds. They become excellent responders and terrible allocators. That is not discipline. That is miswiring. A real control system tells each dollar where it belongs before stress gets a vote. Which brings me to your emergency reserve in your 20s. People can sometimes survive with 3 months of expenses because the machine around them is small, fewer dependents, fewer fixed costs, less complexity. In your 30s, the machine is bigger and the failure points multiply. The water heater dies. The transmission gives up. The child needs dental work. The aging parent needs help. The job gets shaky. The business has a dry quarter. A good opportunity appears and you cannot act because you are too busy staying alive. That last part matters. Most people think emergency funds exist only to protect against bad surprises. The smartest use of reserve capital is that it also lets you seize good surprises. I call this the option reservoir. When you have 6 to 12 months of living expenses sitting somewhere liquid and sensible, you do not just sleep better, you negotiate better, you think better, you refuse bad offers faster, you can help family without detonating your own structure. You can survive disruption without becoming desperate. You can move on opportunity without liquidating long-term assets at the wrong time. That is why I want the reserve big, boring, and easy to reach. High-yield savings, treasury exposure, if appropriate. Something liquid, something clear, not a heroic bet, not a story stock, not an experiment. Your emergency reserve is not there to impress anybody. It is backup power for the control room. Once backup power is installed, I want to talk about the most misunderstood engine in this decade: retirement compounding. By 40, I want to see real weight in that account. Not symbolic effort, not a little progress you post about to feel mature. Real weight. 3 times your annual salary by 40 is not a magic number, but it is a serious signal that the engine is no longer decorative. People underestimate what their 30s are for. This is not just the decade when you can contribute more. It is the decade when time is still willing to cooperate with you. By 40, if you have serious capital already at work, the machine changes character. Compounding stops being a theory and starts becoming labor. It begins to carry part of the load. That shift is what most people miss. They think saving for retirement is about being responsible later. It is really about getting future labor from capital sooner. If you reach 40 with 3 times your salary working for you, that is not a random benchmark. It means the machine is no longer starting from zero. It means the next 25 or 30 years have enough runway for compounding to matter in a way you can feel. It means your older self has a partner instead of a burden. And if you are behind, do not waste energy on shame. Shame is a terrible allocator, but do not lie to yourself either. Every year you delay serious savings, the machine asks for a harsher contribution later. Math is patient, but it is not merciful. I also want you to understand how to protect that engine from one of the quietest forms of self-sabotage in the entire decade. Lifestyle inflation. This is the disease of people who improve their income but never improve their position. They get the raise and immediately convert it into a nicer lease, a nicer apartment, a nicer restaurant habit, a nicer vacation pattern, a nicer car, a nicer version of looking successful. The income climbs, the savings rate does not. Their life gets shinier and their control does not improve at all. That is not wealth. That is costume design. I call the cure raise capture. Every time income rises, a meaningful share of that increase must be captured before your ego names a use for it. Half is a good starting rule. More is better when possible. If you get a raise, your retirement contribution should rise automatically. If you get a bonus, part of it should never even pass through the emotional theater of what do I want to buy. It should be routed before identity gets involved. This is how serious builders separate from performers. The performer wants visible upgrades. The builder wants irreversible position. In your 30s, you will meet many people who earn a lot and own very little. Their lifestyle is large, but their control system is fragile. They cannot miss a paycheck. They cannot absorb a shock. They cannot walk away from work they hate. They cannot help their family without borrowing. They cannot take advantage of downturns because every dollar has already been assigned to appearances. I have no interest in that kind of success. You should not either. Now let me say something that many financial discussions push to the side because it sounds uncomfortable. If you have people who depend on you, estate planning is not optional. Your 30s are often when money stops being a one-person problem. There may be a spouse, children, a house, insurance policies, retirement accounts, business interest, and family obligations. If something happens to you and nothing is documented, you have not avoided an unpleasant topic. You have outsourced difficult decisions to chaos. That is irresponsible. A will is not morbid. Powers of attorney are not morbid. Beneficiary designations are not morbid. Guardianship decisions are not morbid. What is morbid is pretending these things are for old people. While your own household depends on structure you have not written down. I call this family continuity. A control system is not complete if it only works while you are conscious, healthy, present, and making decisions. A mature system still functions when life becomes unfair. That is part of love, whether people phrase it that way or not. Now, I want to move to something many people treat like a side issue when it is actually a primary asset. Your health. Most people do not think of health as part of wealth because they insist on thinking too narrowly. They imagine wealth as account balances and asset values. That is amateur thinking. Health determines earning capacity, energy quality, decision stamina, medical spending, stress tolerance, and the probability that you can actually enjoy what you built. I call it the core asset. A bad body is an expensive operating environment. It makes work harder. It makes patience harder. It makes discipline harder. It can drain capital directly through treatment and indirectly through missed opportunity, lower productivity, bad sleep, and worse judgment. By your 30s, your body is no longer forgiving everything you do to it. That is not a tragedy. That is a deadline. If you learn to move regularly, eat like a rational adult most of the time, sleep enough, and control your stress, now you are not doing something cosmetic. You are preserving the machine that produces income, thought, patience, and endurance. You are defending future cash flow. People will spend on convenience, subscriptions, status dinners, and gadgets. They do not need, then call a gym membership or better food too expensive. That is upside down thinking. A low quality body creates long-term drag that makes many savings absurd. The same long horizon thinking applies if you have children or expect to. College is not a moral obligation to fully prepay at any cost, but pretending the cost is not coming is another form of control failure. If you have children, a 529 is not a sexy topic, but tax-free growth for education is exactly the kind of quiet edge serious families learn to respect. Education inflation has not been kind. Time matters, tax treatment matters, intentional structure matters. When you begin early, even modest amounts gain the advantage that always matters most in investing, time that is not being argued with. I do not bring this up so you can perform perfect parenting through a savings account. I bring it up because your 30s are the decade when multiple futures begin demanding capital from the same household. Retirement wants funding, emergency reserves want funding, housing wants funding, children want funding. If you do not route those claims early, the decade runs you instead of the other way around. And that brings me to one of the most overlooked forms of strength in money. Financial confidence, not arrogance, not fake certainty. Confidence, most people think confidence comes from hitting a number. I disagree. Real financial confidence comes from having a system that you understand, a sequence that you trust, and enough visibility that you are not emotionally ambushed every time the market shakes, the car breaks, or the headlines start screaming. I call this command visibility. Your monthly burn, your debt status, where your reserve sits, what percentage is going to retirement. What would happen if one income disappeared, whether insurance is weak, your estate documents exist, what your next priority is, what you are not funding yet and why, which trade-offs are strategic and which are just avoidance wearing a good excuse. That kind of clarity changes the way you live. You stop lying awake asking vague questions like whether you are behind. You start asking useful questions like whether an extra $200 a month should go to the mortgage, the retirement account, the taxable brokerage, the education fund, or the reserve. You become specific. Specific people make better decisions, and better decisions, repeated, become better lives. Now let me show you how all these pieces fit together. Because isolated advice is how people stay confused, your 30s are not asking for 10 disconnected milestones. They are asking for one integrated control system. First, you remove control hijackers. That means consumer debt goes, not eventually aggressively. Second, you protect your pricing power. That means your credit becomes excellent and stays clean. Third, you install the map. That means you know your long-range plan instead of improvising through one decade that has too much at stake for improvisation, budgeting, retirement, estate structure, tax moves, tracking, whatever acronym somebody uses does not matter to me. The sequence does. Fourth, you build backup power. That means a real emergency reserve, size for adult life. not college life. Fifth, you turn on the compound engine. That means retirement contributions. Serious enough that by 40 the machine has weight. Sixth, you stop rewarding yourself by weakening yourself. That means raise capture and lifestyle inflation immunity. Seventh, you protect your family from chaos. That means estate planning, beneficiaries, decision rights, continuity. Eighth, you defend the core asset. That means health becomes part of wealth, not a side hobby. You get to if convenient. Ninth, you fund the futures that will predictably arrive. That means education planning. If you have children, not magical thinking. 10th, you create command visibility. That means confidence built on systems, not mood. Do you see the pattern? Every serious move in this decade is about control, not appearance, not comparison, not optimization, theater, control. That is why I am less interested in your salary than in your system. I have seen people with modest incomes build formidable stability because their control system was designed early and obeyed consistently. I have also seen six-figure earners live like hostages because every dollar that entered their life was already spoken for by debt, status, habit, and avoidance. Money does not reward busyness. Money rewards design. Your 30s are when design starts compounding. That decade punishes drift because drift becomes expensive fast. One extra car payment, one ignored credit problem, one empty raise, one missing emergency fund, one delayed retirement increase, one undocumented estate issue, one preventable health slide, one decade of saying, I will get serious later, and suddenly later is expensive. This is the part people do not like hearing. But I am not here to comfort you into mediocrity. If you are in your 30s and you still treat money like a monthly mood problem, you are gambling with your 40s. If you are in your 30s and you still think a raise by itself will save you, you are confusing income with control. If you are in your 30s and you still have not built reserves, automated compounding, protected your credit, and defined your plan, then what you have is not flexibility. What you have is unfinished infrastructure. And unfinished infrastructure collapses when pressure arrives. But the good news is better than the danger is bad because your 30s are still early enough for major correction. You still have time to remove debt before it wastes another decade. You still have time to raise the score that will price your next big decision. You still have time to build the option reservoir that turns fear into bargaining power. You still have time to install the retirement engine while time remains your ally. You still have time to immunize yourself against lifestyle inflation before identity hardens around it. You still have time to put documents in place, fix the routing of your cash, care for the body that produces your income, and build the confidence that comes from visibility instead of denial. But do not mistake still have time for have endless time. That is how people lose a decade. They hear one encouraging sentence and use it as permission to stay the same. I am not giving you permission to stay the same. I am telling you that your 30s are the decade when your financial control room either comes online or stays dark. If it stays dark, every future responsibility will feel like punishment. If it comes online, every future responsibility becomes more manageable because the machine is no longer improvising. It is allocating, it is protecting, it is compounding. And that is the final test I want to leave with you. The next time money comes in, do not ask the small question most people ask. Do not ask what you feel like doing with it. Ask the adult question. Does this dollar strengthen my control system or weaken it? That is the door. Not next year, not when the market calms down, not when the kids are older, not when work gets easier. Now, because your 30s do not care whether you intended to get organized, they only care whether you did. And if you do this right, one day you will look back and realize this decade was not the one that buried you under obligations. It was the one where you finally stopped living under money and started directing it. That is the difference between earning more and becoming harder to shake. That is the difference between looking successful and becoming secure. That is the difference between a life that reacts and a life that commands. You do not need a perfect decade. You need a controlled one. So make your choice. You can keep running a live adult life through an unfinished system and hope pressure stays low, or you can build a control room. Now, while time income growth and compounding still have enough runway to turn discipline into freedom, one path leaves you explaining for the next 30 years why you always felt behind. The other path makes this the decade when your future stopped being an accident. Pick one.